Hi there. Today we're going to be talking about the special relationships that exist when you have parallel lines and all of their angles. So what angles you have here in these little pictures is a very, very common type of diagram. So the basic idea here is that lines A and B, that refers to these two lines, are parallel. And the way that they're signified or signaled to us that they are parallel is by these little arrows. When you draw the same arrows on two lines, that tells you that they are parallel. They are the same distance everywhere. So that's one thing that needs to happen. The second thing that needs to happen is you have to have this line that goes through them called a transversal. This line could be at any angle, any kind of configurement, but this is a very basic picture that you'll see a lot. So when these things happen, there's some special properties that take place. I'm going to erase all these lines here. I'm actually going to leave my parallel lines and my transversal highlighted. Kind of helps you see what's going on. So you end up getting two clusters of angles. And one cluster of angles is here, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And the other cluster of angles is 5, 6, 7, and 8. And so I might refer to them as like a top cluster and a bottom cluster, or a left cluster and a right cluster, depending on how the picture looks. This last line here, this note, is pretty important. Any two angles in this picture are either congruent, meaning they have the exact same angle measurement, or they're supplementary. They add up to 180. So let's take a look at some of these relationships. So first one we'll take a look at is corresponding angles. Corresponding angles are congruent to each other. That's why they have this little symbol here. So that means they have the same angle measurement. Corresponding angles would refer to angles in the same relative position in each cluster. So for example, they're telling us angle 1 and angle 5 would be corresponding because they're both in the upper left-hand corner of their own cluster. See if you could find another pair of corresponding angles. Maybe you found angle 3 and angle 7. Raise your hand if you pick those two. Just kidding, I can't see you. So corresponding angles are congruent. If I were to list out all of the pairs of corresponding angles, I would say that 1 must be congruent to 5, 2 must be congruent to 6, 4 must be congruent to 8, and 3 must be congruent to 7. Those are the ones that are in the same position. Those are all of my corresponding angles. Alternate interior angles is the next term. Alternate interior angles also have a congruent relationship, so that's why they have that little congruent symbol. So these are angles between the parallel lines on different sides of the transversal. So the ones we're talking about here are this set of angles down here. Some of these will be considered alternate interior. They have to be on the inside of the parallel line. So they're on the inside of my orange lines. And they have to be on opposite sides of the transversal. So for example, angle 4 and angle 6 are alternate interior angles and are therefore congruent. So maybe I will move this list over here. So these were all my corresponding angles. My alternate interior angle would be angle, I don't need the angle sign. Angle 4 is congruent to angle 6. And then there's one more pair, see if you could pick it out. Hopefully you found angle 3 is congruent to angle 5. So those are the ones on the inside of my orange parallel lines, but they're on opposite sides of my red line. Alternate interior angles. Then we get to basically the opposite of that, alternate exterior angles. You might be able to guess that these just have to be on the outside of my orange lines. So the angles that I'm kind of looking at over here would be 1 and 2 and 8 and 7. They have to be on the outside of the orange lines on the opposite sides of the transversals. So one example would be angle 1 and angle 7. Those have to be congruent because they are on opposite sides of the transversal and outside the orange lines. There's one more pair, see if you could find it. And hopefully you got angle 2 is congruent to angle 8. By using the double arc, I'm demonstrating in my diagram that 2 and 8 are congruent because they both have this little arc with 2 lines. 1 and 7 have the arc with 1 line, so those are congruent. So I can add to my list that 1 must be congruent to 7 and 2, what, I'm doing less than or equal to. Hold on. 1 must be congruent to 7 and 2 must be congruent to 8. So those are my alternate exterior angles. All right, another relationship. Let's go with this color. These would be my consecutive interior angles. This would be angles between the parallel lines, but on the same side as the transversal. And as you can see, these are not congruent. It says 180 degrees here. They are supplementary. So the angles I'd be looking at are these guys. And they're saying that any two that are next to each other are supplementary. So I can say that angle 4 plus angle 3 has to equal 180. And that makes sense because they actually make a straight line. So we know that they're supplementary. Angle 5 plus angle 6 have to equal 180. For the same reason, those make a straight line. But the new information here is that you could also look consecutively up and down. I could look at angle 4 plus angle 5, and those are supplementary. Now, those do not make an obvious right angle, but think about how you could reason through that. We've already proven before that angle 3 and angle 5 are equal to each other. They're alternate interior angles. So if I replace angle 5 with angle 3, they have the same value. Now you could see why 4 and 5 would be supplementary as well, because 3 and 5 have to be equal. And for the same reason, 3 and 6 are supplementary as well. So all of these properties or rules or whatever you want to call them that we just talked about, these all help us solve basically angle puzzles. None of them seem that important on their own, but when you're missing pieces of information in a puzzle, then it is really helpful to know all the different tricks. At the bottom here, they also have another picture that might be helpful. I don't know if that's something maybe you want to take a screenshot of, but it shows you the exterior angles, the interior angles, top cluster, bottom cluster. You might find it helpful, you might not, but basically what they're trying to show you is anything out here is considered exterior. Anything in here is considered interior. There's lots of other relationships in these pictures too. For example, we already know about vertical angles, and you can't forget about that. So vertical angles tell us that angle 2 and 4 must be congruent to each other. And that 1, I'm going to do a double circle, and 3 must be congruent to each other. So those rules still apply. But basically everything in this picture is either congruent or supplementary to each other. Let's try using all this information on the next page. If you wanted to take a screenshot of anything you see here that maybe you found helpful, you're welcome to do that. All right, so on page 22, they give you exactly one angle, and you should be able to figure out the rest of the angles in this picture. I'm going to say that it is fine to not use algebra here, just solve it. Pause the video, see if you could finish up the page, unpause when you're ready to go over it. All right, hopefully you're ready to go over this. If you got stuck, watch the video until you figure out kind of the pattern here, and then re-pause and finish up the page, the ones you got stuck on. So I'm just going to show you how my brain might work on this. I like to work one cluster at a time. So I see this 140, and I'm going to use the vertical angle down here and say that this is also 140 degrees. They're vertical angles. They're across from each other, across an X. Then I can use this line to see a supplementary relationship right here on this side, or on either side really. I know that 140 plus the question mark has to equal 180 because I see a straight line there. So this must equal 40 degrees. Those add up to 180. To get the remaining angle, maybe I'll use this vertical relationship here and say that this is 40 degrees too. Or I could have used a supplementary relationship. I have my top cluster filled out. Once you have your top cluster filled out, you could just copy it to the bottom cluster. So upper left-hand corner is 40 degrees. Bottom left-hand corner is 140. Top right hand is 140. Bottom right hand is 40 degrees. So all of these work the same way as the one that I just showed. So if that's a clue that could kind of help you out, you can pause the video now and try the rest of these. All right, let's move on to this page. So on this page, it's the same idea, except I do see some X's, so we're going to have to be using algebra here. The idea here is that we have to find a couple of different things. We're going to take the given information, we have to find what X is, and then we have to find two of the angle measures as well. For the equation, they're asking you to come up with what algebraic equation could be used to solve it, and I'll show you what they mean by that. So the first thing we want to do is look at the two angles that they gave us and determine, are they supplementary or are they congruent? Well, since they are across an X from each other, I can see that these are vertical angles. Vertical angles are congruent to each other. So this and this have to be equal to each other. So my equation is 4x equals 2x plus 60. See if you can solve that and answer these three questions. Pause the video, come back when you're ready to go over it. All right, hopefully you're ready to go over it. When I solve this equation, I'm going to do the work over here. You do have to show algebra because there's variables here. I'm going to subtract 2x from both sides. I get 2x equals 60. Divide both sides by 2, I get x equals 30. There's no angle that's called angle X, so it's not 30 degrees, it's just 30. ABG is the angle I have circled right now. So I need 4 times 30. 4 times 30 equals 120. So that is going to be degrees. There's an angle that's 120 degrees. CBD will be this angle. 2 times 30 plus 60. That also equals 120. And I didn't even really have to do that because I knew they had to be equal to each other, so you didn't really have to show work on both of those. Pause the video, try the rest of these, come back when you're ready to go over it. All right, I'm just going to go over a couple of these. I'm going to start with number 3. So in number 3, I can see that C, D, and EH are congruent or are parallel, and AG is my transversal. The two angles they've given me are corresponding angles. They're both in the same position in two different clusters. If you look back at that first note page, we looked at corresponding angles are congruent. They equal each other. So my equation is going to be 9x equals 5x plus 60. When I solve that, subtract 5x from both sides, I get 4x equals 60. Divide both sides by 4, I get x equals 15. So x is 15, but there's no angle x. None of these angles are 15 degrees, so I don't put a degree sign. And then I have to do 9 times 15 to get 135. That is degrees. There is an angle that's 135 degrees. I should be able to assume that HFA is also 135 degrees, but you might want to plug in just to check, and that does equal 135. All right, so hopefully you guys got the hang of this page, and let's take a look at the next one. So basically here, they've given us a diagram, and the first diagram goes with 9, 10, and 11. That could be solved with this picture. Second diagram goes with 12, 13, and 14. That could be solved with this picture. Each of these statements you're going to say is true, or sorry, always true, sometimes true, or never true, and then just give a very, very brief explanation. So let me take you through the first one to show you kind of how I would look at this. So it says angle 1 is greater than angle 3. What relationship do these have? They're vertical angles. That means they are congruent. They're the same. So angle 1 cannot be greater than angle 3. This is never true. And my explanation, short and sweet, I'm going to say they're congruent. Or I might say they are vertical angles. Go ahead and finish up the rest.